and welcome to the Tension Podcast. I'm your host, Donna Dupont, with the Archipelago of Design. Today's podcast is part of our series on the power of play in serious games. Joining me today is Thomas Danger. Thomas holds a Master's of War Studies from King's College London, where he was introduced to the world of wargaming. Since 2023, Thomas has been working as a professional wargamer at the Royal Danish Defence College in the Institute of Military Operations. Thomas mainly focuses on creating educational wargames for the Danish Defence College and the Danish Armed Forces. Thomas is also the co-founder of Strand Simulations Group, a wargaming company based in the UK. Welcome, Thomas, to the podcast.
Welcome.
So to kick us off, you have a really interesting background in wargaming. We would love to learn more about your pathway. How did you end up as a wargamer at the Danish Defence College?
This is, I'll say, an accidental and very unique story. A lot of wargamers, if you listen to their backstory, they'll say that have done wargaming for years and years before that, mostly from hobby wargaming. That's not my case. Before doing my master's degrees at King's College London, I didn't know basically what was wargaming. I had vaguely an idea about games, but that's pretty much it. So I did not practice, nor play, nor anything. I was a big video game player, but that's pretty much it. So when I did the master in war studies, I've met David Banks, and I've went into the course of wargaming theory and practice from Dr. David Banks, that has now become a senior lecturer at King's College London, and I want to say hello and thanks to him, because it's really thanks to him that I was able to become a wargamer later on. And I had an amazing class with colleagues, with friends that were really nice, and we played wargames after the courses, and we were also designing wargames, participating in the creation of wargames, running wargames. We had also two large simulations at King's College London that we used to run, and it was really a great formatting experience for all of us. Later on, after leaving London, with two friends, we founded the Strand Simulations Group. It was a bit of a crazy idea at the beginning of saying, yeah, we're going to have a wargaming company and kind of see how it goes. And it went for a year and a half for me. It's really a weird moment where you have a bunch of people that just graduated from the master and like, yeah, let's just found a company. And they have no idea how to do that. It's harder than how it is actually. So yeah, a complicated story. But later on, there was an offer to join the Royal Danish Defence College, and I was able to seize it. And that's how I basically end up going there. So how do I become a wargamer? Actually, I don't know. It's accidents upon accidents of things I've done. Obviously, I studied wargaming. I developed wargames on the side. And whenever I got the occasion, I would play wargames and participate in wargaming events, meet wargaming people. But it's really unique, and I don't think it's something that can be repeated that easily. And that's something we can also talk later on about how to become a wargamer. It's really not something easy, I think.
Okay, thank you. That's a very interesting story. So it was a little bit unexpected for you. You were interested in games, you studied wargaming, and then an opportunity came up and you seized it with the Danish Defence College. That's really, that's very interesting and very unique path. So tell us a bit about the value of wargaming. You've studied the theory, you've studied the practice, you've designed and done simulations. Why should institutions consider using wargaming, or why do they use wargaming?
I always say, because there are many wargaming definitions, I just say wargaming is a tool. It's a useful tool. And it's a useful tool with some unique abilities that other tools don't have. For example, you have active learning. So you actually do something. You're not just listening to a PowerPoint presentation, which is often the most preferred methods in most institutions, and that's an issue for many reasons. It breaks linearity. A wargame is not linear, and it surprises people, and that's something that is good especially when you're a decision maker and you're supposed to make decisions. in an uncertain environment, it will train your brain. Sebastian Bay say that it will train your muscles brain, something like that, he said. Um, and there is also the fact that, and that's my personal favorite, of people seeing a problem, a situation, and they'll say, why don't they just do that? It will be so easy. Yeah, right. Then a wargame allows you to put those people in a situation and say, you think it's easy? Okay, we created an environment where you can actually do it. So yeah, do it if you think it's too easy. You think that you have a solution that is easy to solve that defense problem of some sort? Okay, you say it's easy. Let's do that in a wargame and see how it goes. And usually, and I think it's a tool that allow you to have a deeper conversation about the things you really care about, and that's why and also that's really something that is, I think, relatively unique with wargaming, and that's why really valuable, not for just military institution.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. You're absolutely right. It sounds like the way you're using it as a tool is for really complex situations where you can't think about just a linear solution, but you need to really dive into that environment and explore it and to kind of see what the complexities are and what the challenges are in order to come up with some new insights, deeper learning, as you were saying, and understanding of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the problems, I will refer here to my work here at the defense college. We are
Hmm.
teaching operational level planning and related to the kind of multi-domain operation. There is no obvious easy solution to anything. So there is no straight line you can draw and say, okay, that's how we should do it. There is always many possibilities and many area with risk that you need to manage. And having a war games allow you to train that muscles in your brain, and that will help you to better grasp with the complexity, with the difficulties, and also bringing a conversation of things you would not think it's a problem, and then in the game you realize, wait a minute, actually it doesn't work, and only a consequence based tool could have bring up on that discussion.
Right. So it allows you to safely kind of test ideas or explore it to really see if something may or may not work
Exactly, yeah.
before you just implement, which is, I think, very smart. And I love the fact that you talk about the cognitive side, the brain, and exercising that brain in terms of working with complexity and expanding kind of the understanding of the problem and the questions, right? Because I think that's so important today, because a lot of times we want a quick solution, a quick answer, but today the world, as you were saying, with multi-domain operations or even just some of the global challenges we have, they are so complex that you need this type of mental agility to be able to understand it, to come up with solutions,
I
right?
also say that it's not just a question of problems are complex, is that the institution where you work on a daily basis wants you to put simple solution, and ideally what they want is a solution that fits into a PowerPoint presentation. And
Yeah.
that's something we see often, and it's not just me making that up. I've got a colleague writing on that all the time, and it's an issue because it forces to think differently, and you will just remove or simplify or change your thinking just to fit a PowerPoint presentation or to fit a brief, an oral brief or whatever, when actually you know the problem is deeper or more complex, but you will summarize that into bullet points. War games allow you to still
Right.
bring upon that conversation, but going on the other direction, going through the complexity rather than avoiding the complexity.
Yeah. That's really great. I love that, going through the complexity. So not being afraid of it, diving into it. How about uncertainty? Is there a lot of uncertainty that people tend to explore in wargaming?
That's one of also the strength of wargaming, is that it's a tool that can be used to underline taking decision under uncertainty. So do you want to go left or right? Oh yeah, but there is a 60% chance that there is a trap. Okay, so
Yeah.
what? Yeah, but it's not just a question you ponder upon. You actually need to take a decision now, because the wargame immerses you in a situation where it's not just about talking of what's happening. It's about now you need to take a decision, no matter how good it's gonna be, how bad it's gonna be. And I think that many decisions are in retrospect can be seen as bad because of many reasons, but it's very easy when like you can analyze from the outside and comment upon the decision. But when you are inside of the process, when you are inside of the problem and you actually need to take a decision now with only the available information, and maybe the available information are limited or corrupted, you still need to make the decision. And those wargames will help you have the mental agility to train to face those kinds of situations.
That's great. That sounds like such a fantastic tool. And as you're describing it, it reminds me of foresight scenarios that are meant to create an environment where it's complex and it's uncertain, to have dialogue. And there are different ways of facilitating it, but I can see the nice how it's so complementary in terms of using wargaming as one way to explore a future scenario, right? With with what you're describing in terms of going into the complexity head on, not being afraid of it, and figuring out decisions that need to be made, and what are those uncertainties, those areas that perhaps we need to uncover and figure out, what would be the decisions, what would be the risks, down all of those pathways. I love it. That's fantastic. In terms of barriers, are there barriers to war gaming today, like that you've come across in your work?
There are many. It depends at which level you focus. If it's like broad implementation within like institution or countries, or if you're more like on how to make a wargame. I'll say that at least in my experience at the defense college, something that really surprised me is when you arrived and you start talking about wargaming, most military officer will say, "Oh, wargaming, we already do that all the time." Oh, really? No, they do course of action wargaming, which is something completely different. But I didn't know it was such a problem before. But when you talk about wargames, they expect a course of action wargaming, which is basically in planning a tool to compare different course of action that you can take. But it's a very simple and limited tool, and whether it's called wargaming, whatever, but they think that wargaming is only that and only that. And I had to break that mindset, showing that wargames can be useful for education, for analysis, for training. And they were like, "What? Really? It's crazy, right?" Because they were so focused on the fact that wargaming is only a tool to use for to choose a course of action. And I had to take that mindset away to say, yeah, you can actually do many things with wargaming, and it's still something that I'm confronting, that I'm seeing a lot. So I'll say that's one of the things. And then barrier to wargaming, there is obviously the fact that usually in defense of most European countries, you have like one or two wargamers at most doing most of the work. For example, the first wargamer there, Mark, my colleague, he is working as a wargamer for the Danish Navy. He can't do anything else simply because he's just overworked. And like, you wanted to do more wargaming project, sure, but he can't do it simply because there is too much work. Uh, the case of France is also very telling. You have Antoine Bourguillot that I also salute here. He's basically doing most of the stuff, and like, if he is not there, a big aspect of the French army wargaming efforts will just completely collapse. So there is a need to build a long-term wargaming capability that doesn't just require one or two person to be there, but that can be sustained on the long term, even if the person is leaving. And I think it's one of the big challenge that a lot of countries are discovering or will discover when they are really implementing wargaming.
That's really interesting. I had no idea that, I mean, it makes sense, but I didn't realize that a lot of wargaming today, the traditional, is just very course of action focused, versus you're talking about a much more comprehensive way of using war games, as a tool for a lot of different conversations, learning, analysis, which I think is fantastic. So it's, that's really great to hear. And yeah, the barriers, I guess, capacity, right, to be able to do this is a challenge. If one were to get involved with a small wargaming project, how much time does it take? Is it a very involved kind of endeavor, or can it be done on a lighter scale too, or is there like variations?
It depends, is the honest answer. If you want a longer answer, I think it's all a matter of the importance that as a professional wargamer you are given. For example, there is my main project for the Defense College. That's something for years, and I'm developing one wargame, one series of wargames actually, but for one specific course. And that's something I know is my thing. I'm working on it all the time. Then there is other project of like other institution or like other branches coming. Oh, we want to bargain on that. Oh, yeah, sure. But like, I'm not gonna devote too much time simply because I'm not ordered to do it, or we don't have any like contract. It's just orally. Oh, we would like to see that. Oh, okay, whatever. So depending on the needs, it can be not a lot, and just yeah, you want to see what's wargaming. Okay, we can discover that. Or if it's big thing, then it's something that will stick for years. So it really depends. The question of capacity is actually very interesting. You we can think of wargaming in a lot of theoretical terms on how to implement it, etc., etc. But give me rooms, give me rooms with tables and chairs where I can actually play wargames with people. Because sometimes just to have a room can be a pain. I'm fighting to have rooms to play wargames because there is not enough rooms. And that's a very concrete problem. And there is no buildings coming magically out of the ground. I don't have the power to decide that. So I just need to deal with the limited capacity in terms of infrastructure. And that's pretty much it. I would love to have a wargaming room where I can storage wargames. No, they are all there on my shelf. But yeah, those very concrete problems can also be a barrier.
Right. Yeah. So making sure you have a dedicated space to be able to have people come together and explore games. I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. So that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure a lot of organizations also have similar challenges and barriers for any kind of project, whether it's wargaming or other types of initiatives where it's just resources are very stretched
Yeah.
thin, and people have to make decisions about how to use it, and they have to know the value of what type of action they're going to take to make sure that it's worth all of their time and investment. So I think that's something that a lot of organizations give a lot of consideration to today. But for me, like I'm from the field of emergency management traditionally. And we did a lot of tabletop exercises, which is very much course of action, or type of form of wargaming, more around civil protection. So we know there's an emergency. We're testing plans. We're testing things to see where the breakdowns are. Also, what new issues might come up. So it's a little different, but it has some similarities. But you were mentioning earlier that wargaming, it's broader, and it's not just about war fighting. It can be applied to a lot of different types of challenges. Can you share a bit more on that in terms of the assumptions about wargaming and not always about fighting?
Yeah, that's the curse of wargaming, to have the word war in its name that we can't remove because all the other words like serious games and so on are just ugly, but we need to deal with it. I will start from like the center and then we will go away. I think that defense related first. I'll say that it's not just about warfighting as such. You have war games on defense procurement, managing the money, managing the organization. How do you do manage human resources? You can have a war game on that. How do you do public relation? You can have a war game on that. There's nothing recruiting, for example. It's all problems that are really important for the defense that can be wargamed under the right circumstances and have nothing to do related to capabilities, warfighting, very different. And it's still something that is, I think, really important. And then you leave the space of the defense and you go into the broader sphere of like, yeah, you can do wargames on diplomacy and foreign relation as such, with ambassadors or with diplomats. That can be also very useful. There is also the sphere. You said you're coming from the emergency services, where like you can crisis response, for example, whether it's flooding, whether it's anything related to that. It's a lot of different services put together: firefighter, police, hospitals that needs to be brought together, and wargames also work for them. It's not related to war as such; it's management of a problem. There is that famous game from Rex Brynan, for example, Aftermath, about disaster relief wargame. It's basically that. So you can really go further, and then you can go even further away from that, and you can go away from like any crisis kind of thing, and you can just be about economy. If you're a company fighting on the market, for example, I'll call that business wargaming, and you have opponents and you want to see what's the best strategy available on that market, and that can be a market for anything. If you're selling cars or whatever, you can have wargames. It's the same tool. It's a tool. It's the same methods. It will produce the same effects. It's just used in a different adversarial, control, difficult, uncertain situation, and it's completely unrelated to defense. And still, whether it's economy, whether it's anything else, you can use wargames. But again, we are stuck with the name wargames, so people will always refer to that. Oh my god, you're trying to kill people. But never mind. We need to take a deep breath and think and explain calmly to people. No, it's not just war.
Right. No, thank you for sharing that. That makes sense. And I like how you mentioned adversarial actions, right? So it doesn't have to be war, but it's just that where there's conflicts, competition versus collaboration, and these tensions that you're navigating in the game. And I think that's important to explore in any kind of situation. And I like how you've given a lot of examples from diplomatic type of scenarios to crisis response, which you have to bring together a lot of different professionals across a system that don't always get a chance to work together until there's an emergency or a disaster, and then all of a sudden they're collaborating in ways that they are not accustomed to sometimes. So being able to get this type of experience ahead of time, or to perhaps even test an evolving situation through a war game to get some knowledge about what if things were to converge would be quite advantageous strategically, as you were mentioning. I'm curious though, sometimes the term serious games is used to, I guess, and I don't know if you're familiar with this in your work in Europe, like in Denmark, or through your studies in the UK. But I guess it sounds similar in terms of game, but without the war. Do you have any thoughts on the term serious games and how it's different from wargaming?
My guess, people talk about that, but I can't remember what they were saying. So I will go with my wild guess. Is that first it's an attempt to put the word war away from it, and create serious game, which I think is not a very pretty word, but never mind. Secondly, there is also the fact that we take away the adversarial kind of situation to just say, hey, you are in a situation. And there is no real competition or adversary necessarily in a serious game. A serious game can be far more linear and far less. You feel less the opposing forces in a serious game. Maybe there is not at all. And so I think the deep distinction is on the fact that one underlines tension. Even there is adversary, there is adverse, like there is people who will compete, even if they are technically part of the same team, country, group. There is competition even within the same group. A wargame will, I think, focus on two aspects. While a serious games wants to go through what's going to happen, a bit like a wargame, but it will left aside the competition aspect. That's at least the way where I'm
Mm.
seeing it, but many people have different interpretation of it, and that's all. For me, it makes no difference if a group of diplomats is terrorized at the idea of using a war game because war is bad and oh my god, it's terrible. Then just call your war game serious game, and you've got a serious game that is actually a war game, and nobody on the planet will care about that. So just use the word that you want, and that's all right. That will be my final take.
Yeah. That's interesting. And so it's really about the competition, that adversarial piece in whatever the context or the topic is about, and really making sure that that's considered within the design
Yeah.
of the game. I think that makes sense because you're right. There's so many different variations on serious games. I've been exposed to a few of them, and each one is unique. And there's different levels of complexity, and some may get into adversarial, but it might be on the light side, versus heavier competitive topics. So that's really helpful to know. So I'm curious, for those of us who have never created a war game, what is it like to create a war game? Like, where do you start? Like, if someone were to say, okay, I want to do a simple war game, what would be like some steps that they would need to take very simply to start that process?
Pain. No, very simply, there is no very simple answer. First, it depends where the needs come from. Whether you are alone and you're like, damn, I want to design a wargame on that specific thing, then it's gonna be completely different from, hello, I am a sponsor, I am a client, and I want to better understand that problem. Can you do that for me, please? First, that's the first distinction. You do that alone for yourself, or you have a specific contract, a specific sponsor who wants a specific thing. Or maybe they don't know what they want, but you kind of guess what they want. So that's kind of the first step. Then for the development of the wargame, it's all gonna depend why you really want that, what kind of question you're trying to address, and then it's gonna orientate working on the requirements of why you need to this wargame, how it will be used, what needs to be included in it is really the core fundamental aspect of it. So we are not even talking about design here. There is no question of design whatsoever. We are not talking about the color of the contours on the map. Maybe there is no map. You don't know. You just need to know what does the sponsor want, why does he want that, does he really, really, really want that? Because sometimes he says something, but he actually doesn't mean it. Oh, we want that. Oh, really? We think so. Ah, why? And then you get in a discussion with him, and that's not something you can uncover quickly if you're working with a sponsor. It takes time, and it's only when you went through the process, and that's something that Graham R. Longley Brown in his book "Successful Professional Wargames: The Practitioner's Handbook." You can check that book; it's really great. Uh, it's only once you went through that process you can start thinking about what kind of wargames you could develop, and even then, it's after that you're gonna think, okay, it will require these elements, this kind of players, this kind of briefing, this kind of components, etc., etc. The rule book, I'm talking about the rule book at the very end here. What kind of rule book? That's something I experienced at the Defense College. I was writing rules for one of the wargames we were developing, and I was checking uh, range of air-to-air missiles, and I was looking at that kind of thing, and then I was like, why am I doing that? Why? And then I realized that it was completely irrelevant to the wargame. I thought my sponsor wanted to have that discussion in the game, but actually no, he doesn't care at all. So you could just roll a dice and say whatever, it will be all the same for him. And I'm So it's really important to first have your requirements set for why you want that wargame, what effects it wants, and I think it's something you need even if you're developing the wargame for yourself. So you keep in mind what you're gonna do, and then the design follows. A very good wargamer will probably have an idea of the wargame right at the beginning because he already saw many wargames before, and he already knows what works and doesn't work. But he must not set his idea on like, oh yeah, wargames are all that way. So for my next wargames with a next client, I know already. No, you don't know. It's gonna come with time and the discussion with the sponsor. So yeah, as I said in the beginning, pain.
That makes a lot of sense, Thomas. I mean, and I think that is part of design because, like, just thinking broadly about design, there's the front end of design, which is all about scoping, understanding the why, understanding the problem, the needs, and getting all of that clarity before you start saying, okay, this is the actual product design, right? And how we're going to, what it's going to look, feel, cards, players, all of that. And that front end is so important because it shapes the intent and focus and where you're going to put your energy. And so you're saying that it's really important to get clear on your requirements up front, and what you want to learn and the questions and all of that, because and how the insights might could be used, because then that will help you to get real well, it gives you the clarity, number one, but also allows you to then really refine the wargaming when you go into the design
I
phase.
also add to that you need the ability to adapt along the way, especially when it comes to
Mhm.
professional wargames, where the wargame will be used for one specific purpose. Because you will develop the wargames, and then they will come. Oh, by the way, we don't have the rooms for that. Can you do that in a place where the rooms are actually super small and not placed in the manner you want? What the fuck? No. And then you discover that, and you need to manage that, and pain, as I said. You discover things on time. It's really
Yeah.
fun. It's really interesting, but you need to come up with new
Yeah.
solution and change sometimes on the fly because the requirements of the sponsor, even if they were set at the beginning, will change no matter what. Sometimes it's not the fault of the sponsor.
Right.
Sometimes that's the fault of the sponsor, but it doesn't matter. You need to deal with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you don't really know what your needs are until, like, those adaptation pieces on the implementation side, until you start to get into it and it starts to become real. And then people start asking questions. Well, how about this situation? How about this context? And then, it can be challenging from a design perspective. I agree. But it's also exciting because then it allows your game and your tool to be used in different formats and to get more use, and a utility out of it, which I think is really fantastic. So I'm curious. You had mentioned before wargaming is a tool, and there's an opportunity for institutions to use it for all kinds of purposes. It doesn't have to be about war. It can be kind of any type of complex situation where there could be some conflict, adversarial actions, or things you want to explore. Um, what are your thoughts, or do you have any advice on organizations if they want to use it in the future? What are some considerations before they jump into wargaming?
That's a very important question because that's tied up to the how do you make wargaming stick on the long term, and not just wow it's cool and then we will forget about it in 3 or 5 or 10 years. So how do we make wargaming stick, and how do and I will focus first on the organization. How do you do wargaming? First, you need someone to do that. It looks dumb, say that way, but you actually need someone who will craft and design the actual board of the actual thing you need and cut the actual pieces of the wargame at some point. So you can talk all you want, but you need a wargamer for that. That's my first take. Uh, you maybe if you're a very large organization like a military institution, you will find one guy somewhere that is fascinated by that already, and he will be happy to do that on the side. But it's not enough. You need to give him a position where he's officially he has the time in his calendar to work on wargaming. If you are a more smaller organization or a private organization and you don't have such person, you may need to either contact a supplier or someone outside, or you need to actually hire a wargamer internally. Whether it's a contract or like an internship or whatever, you need to have someone to do the job. Um, that's the first thing. The second thing is, especially if you want to make wargaming stick, is have the institutional memory to remember what you have done, because too often the wargaming knowledge of an institution is all in the brain of one person, and if that one person goes away, everything collapses and everything that has been done has been forgotten, which is an absolute disaster, especially if you're a public actor. Private actor may not care as much. Maybe private actors have one problem they want to tackle and then they don't really care in 5 years' times. For a public actor, that's a huge issue. So you need a wargamer and a team of wargamers that will have the institutional memory somewhere where you know that there is everything that has been done before, documented, archives. I try my best. I'm not doing enough, but I try my best to actually have archives of what I'm actually doing. So in 5 years' time, someone can take the file. Oh, he has been doing that. It's very tough because you're documenting at yourself. It's a bit weird sometimes. And sometimes I don't really know how to do that. Also, I don't have an history background as such. I love history, but I'm not an archivist. So it's not easy, but you need to do that. If you want to make wargaming stick, the best way and most simple way to do it is to have what I call a wargaming center. And by what I call a wargaming center is basically just a room where you put a stickers wargaming center and that's it. A room big enough to have a large table, a shelf with some games, and you know it's a designated space within your country institution where the wargaming happens. Meaning that all the other services, all the other branches know that they can reference to that place if they want wargames, which make way more easier to organize, which makes also way more practical the communication. Because one of the things I discovered is that actually there is people who are like, oh, I'm interested into wargaming, but I have no idea how to do that. Well, I'm there. Why don't you send me an email? Why didn't you say hi? Well, I didn't know you were there. So there is a huge problem of communication you need to go through. And I think having one place dedicated for wargaming and also to stock all of your archives that I mentioned before is the right thing to do. If you're a private institution, you may not need that kind of thing, but in that case, you'll need to rely on one or a group of person that designs the wargames for you, and you need to keep them on the long. You need to think about keeping them on the long run.
Yeah, no, I like that idea of having a designated space, because sometimes when you have a space, then it's people remember. Oh, we have a place to come together and explore through a war game, and even if it's a simple first sketch of a wargaming concept, it's a way for people to convene and to come together and talk about the use of the war game or particular situations that might be a good fit for a war game. So I do like that. How about a non-physical space? Like if you wanted to engage a large group of people, is a war game a good fit for maybe virtual contexts or
I'm
environments?
gonna give an official answer, and then I'm gonna give my
Hmm.
personal answer. The official answer
Hmm.
is that wargames can be used online if you need to. Uh, if, for example, you have a large group of people that can't meet at the same time, if you have people all across the planet, then there is possibilities to do wargames online. I know that one of my friends, Ivan D'Alessandro, designed many games that were used online, and then you need to integrate on the design of your wargames the fact that people will be online, and then a lot of the things that are quite obvious when you're in person disappear when it's online. So you need to have the right tempo, you need to have the right elements. It will change the design of your game a little bit, probably, to make it online. So if you need to, you can do that. And that's the end of my official answer. I will switch to my personal answer. I hate it. Everybody hates online. Everybody hates Zoom. Why are you doing that? Please don't. Uh,
Right.
and I think it's not just a question of, oh, I don't like Zoom. It's a more deeper question of war games are tools that provide a ground for discussion. That's one of the main things I've argued so far. And if you are in person looking at the things next to one another, it's way more easier to have that conversation if you're just next to one another rather than you're on your chair at home and the other person is doing something else on his computer. You don't have the same level of connectivity of with the other people in the room. You don't have the same level of engagement, most probably. You don't have the same level of many things that are very important to make the war game succeed. So if you have a war game online, maybe you will go through the war game and you'll say, yeah, we've been through a war game, but was it a good experience at the end? Probably not as good as it if it was in person. So I'll be careful with the online thing, and I'll always support it to be done in person as much as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, that physical, being in person together and that physical connection, it creates this different kind of energy that people feed off each other in a wargaming context. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly for certain, depending on the topic you're exploring, you might want a very, small, closed space where you can explore and have that safety to almost like a psychological safety to kind of go deep and go into the uncertainty. I'm just curious in terms of the future of Wargame and like use of virtual reality or metaverse. Do you see those intersections happening in the future? Potentially, or them growing?
I can again give an official and a personal answer.
Sure.
I think they are both the same. I think maybe you could do stuff, and it's always bad to be dogmatic. So I won't say that something is good or bad. I'll just say that so far I have not encountered cases where computers or like VR, metaverse, anything can bring anything valuable to the table. First, it costs a lot of money. Wargame
Yeah.
is a good tool also because it can be cheap. Okay, you need to pay Wargamers, but everything around is relatively cheap most of the time. If you start to bring IT personnel, computers, servers, then you add zeros to the overall bill, and that's gonna raise the cost. So you need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Do you do that because it's cool and it looks better, or do you do that because the equipment you're bringing to the wargames will bring an element that is essential to make the wargame better? Most of the time, it's the former, not the latter. So you need to be really careful in that. I think there was a bit of that phenomenon a couple of years ago in like when everybody was like, "Oh, cyber is the next big thing. We need to include cyber in every single thing we're doing because cyber is the future." Now it's all about AI. Oh, it's not all about sometimes people just want to put something into something just because it's the zeitgeist of the moment. You need to be careful with that. I'm not saying you can't do that.
Yeah.
I think there is probably digital tools that are useful. I'm just not a big fan. And it's not being a dogmatic hobby. I'm not a dogmatic hobby wargamer because I'm not necessarily what I consider a hobby wargamer as such. Um, but you need to put the question forward. Why do you need to include that? What does it bring? And is it essential? If the answer is no
Yeah.
to one of those questions, then remove it.
That makes a lot of sense. You're right, because there's a cost. The more technology, the fancier it gets very expensive. So you need to understand your requirements and why. And you oftentimes don't need all of that. It can be very simple in person. I guess for me, I'm always curious. And the reason I'm curious is I think about imagination of different environments. And sometimes it can be hard for people to imagine a different environment that they haven't experienced. And so I always think how those tools, whether it's the metaverse or virtual reality, can put people into something different so that they can learn. But there is a trade off for sure, right? And there's a cost
It's
to that.
I'll
So,
say it's
yeah, that's
definitely
interesting.
a topic that is not conceptualized enough. I mean, people think about imagination, and therefore they start talking about immersion in games, in situations, in scenarios. But it's not something people really conceptualize or write here. They don't really know what they're talking about most of the time. So I really strongly emphasize to listen to Ivan D'Alessandro because he's conducting a PhD on immersion in wargaming. So
Oh,
he
good. Oh,
studies
good.
how war games or serious games or anything can be better because you add immersion. What is immersion? How to conceptualize it? How to use it properly? He really works on that. It's a really tough question. And to link that to the question of VR and metaverse, you can do that imagination, that immersion relatively easily. If you want to say, oh, you are in a 1962 missile Cuban crisis and you are the Cuban Soviet leadership, yeah, just put some Cuban music from the 60s, put a poster of Fidel Castro on the wall,
Mm.
and here you are. You're in Cuba, you are in La Havana, and you're taking the decision to potentially end the world. And you're in the right circumstances. You don't
Interesting.
necessarily need a lot of high tech to make it more, to
Right.
bolster the imagination of the audience around the table.
I like that. No, that makes a lot of sense. So you're using visual cues, you're using auditory stimulation to kind of get that immersive experience that is like not high
Yeah,
tech, which I think makes a lot of sense. And it brings a reality so people can get into that that role or that environment and kind of then get more deeper into the
yeah.
play, right, of the
Which
game,
also
which I think
linked to
is,
the
yeah, I
fact
like
that
that.
why I would love at least to have a dedicated wargaming space, meaning that you can
Mhm.
personalize and reconfigure it the way you want, depending on the wargame. Because if it's just a room you happen to book in your organization, then you can't just go crazy on the walls or like just change everything. You need to like not destroy it. If it's the wargaming space dedicated for that, you can start really personalize it the way you want for the wargame that you're gonna use, that you're gonna play. So one more argument for that.
That's great. No, I agree. I know that's fantastic. And you could have all kinds of tools and supporting pieces, as you were saying, to help create that immersive experience within that special designated room. So I do love that idea. I think that's great. And I also, like you said earlier, too, around the institutionalizing the knowledge and the memory of wargame and archiving what you've done and making sure that people know, right? So if a situation comes up again, it's not recreating the wheel. It's kind of saying, oh, we have a war game, let's bring it forward, let's see how we need to refresh it for the new context, which I think is really important. Not just in wargaming, but I think across the board with all the projects, sometimes that institutional memory can be lost. I'm curious though, um, when you when an institution is involved in a war game, what are some real practical ways that they can capture the insights that are being generated through the process and move that knowledge forward? Do you have any tips in terms of how you've seen that done in the past, that can help with decision making or new ideas post war game?
I think it's mostly a set of precondition you need to have before playing the wargame. Those preconditions can be, for example, approval of the leadership. If the people who play the wargames know that the boss and the boss above encourage that practice and think it's a valuable tool, then they will have a better experience first in the wargame. Then they will actually think that the wargame was useful, and they will probably have a better incentive of using what happened during the wargame to better inform what they are doing later on. On the contrary, if the leadership doesn't care or think, oh, like games, it's just for kids, do you even bother with that? Then you can be sure it's not going to be used whatsoever. Even if the people participated in a wargame and there was some great insight in that wargame, it's gonna stop at the door. They're not gonna get that knowledge out of the wargaming space or the wargaming room, and that's pretty much it. So you first need absolutely the leadership to agree with what's happening. Uh, then obviously there is, as in terms of precondition, probably also the players that needs to understand what they are seeing. That it's not a magic ball that predicts the future, for example. So you need, especially if you're playing with people that never saw wargame before, or it's the first time or second time, you need to take the time to explain to them what is it about, why you are doing that, what it can do, and what it won't do for them. And after playing the war game, you need to go through the discussion of, was it useful for you? Did you learn anything? Do a debrief and go through a series of questions with them. And that's a really important time to dedicate, to make sure that when they are leaving the wargaming room, they have the right way of using the lessons of the wargame. I'm not talking about did they receive any lessons in the wargame. They probably do, but maybe they will use the lessons of the wargame in a way that is detrimental for them, that is dangerous for them, that is not good for them. So it's also the job of the wargamer to tell them, you've saw stuff in a wargame, what's gonna change for you later on? Maybe not a lot, maybe a lot. Maybe you will use that insight, but be careful with that insight that you gain, because it's not a magic crystal ball.
Right. No, that's very helpful. And I like the fact that you talked about going back to the requirements. What do we want to learn? What are the questions, right? Being really clear and the leadership being really clear and having within the process ability to capture that and then debriefing it after too, to get, because you're gonna probably have people observing the wargaming playing out. They can kind of observe and take notes, but then the debrief is a very important part of it to get people's experience about what they learned and the insights and at least capture them to discuss later. I think that's important. And sometimes it can get missed, right? So I think thank you for sharing that. That's a really, really great tip. So just to wrap up the podcast, and thank you so much for sharing so much of your experience and knowledge in wargaming. So for our audience, that is new to wargaming or wants to learn more about your work that you do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I'll say that the best way to get a grasp of what is wargaming is to play wargames. It can be difficult because you need to find other people to do that, and also it's better to have a wargame that fits into the general team where you're working, the general things you're already doing, and not something completely irrelevant. Though it can be very good to play a game that is not about something concrete or something related to your job. But go to the website of Ivan D'Alessandro. He has a series of free PDF game. You can download them. Really good, and it will help you get an understanding of what wargames can do or not. Um, there is also the series of microgames edited by Sebastian Bay. I advise you to play some of those microgames. There is one of my games you can play on defense procurement. 10 minutes. You just need a pen and a dice and a die. That's pretty much it. Play that,
That's
and you
good.
can see what it can do or not. Follow the right people on social medias, because we are all on X, on LinkedIn, or whatever. Follow some of the people who do wargaming related stuff, and maybe you will learn some stuff along the way. That can be a first gate, a first introduction. Then all of that won't make you a wargame designer. It's really something completely different. I'll say that you can get a better understanding of what wargaming can bring to you and to your organization if you're in a more senior position. But becoming a wargame designer, is a process that takes a lot of time and resources and energy. If you want to start doing that, it's all right. There is ways you can develop games on your own. There is courses that are developing. I know that, for example, it's Brunel University in London who develop a new master degree in wargaming only. So it's called Wargaming Master Degree. So now they develop that.
Uh-huh.
King's College London also very good for the wargaming bit. Um, but then it's a very difficult way because it's still not really institutionalized, and there is probably not a job behind it. I mean, I've got a job, but it's quite tough to be a wargame designer and then find a job. A lot of people working in wargaming, being sponsored, will say, "Oh yeah, there is a lot of opportunity," but actually that's not really true, because you need to connect, you need to be senior, you need to have the right position, you need to be in the military, you need to have a security clearance. There is a lot of ways that prevent a young or a new wargamers to become a full professional wargame designer. There is a lot of steps still preventing that. So if you are a wargaming sponsor and you want to encourage new wargamers, give them opportunities, whether it's internship, whether it's small projects, see how it goes, and trust them because they know what they are doing. And you'll see that for relatively low cost, they can bring a lot of very good insight to your organization or your institution. So give the opportunity to the people who are developing wargames, and you will be rewarded for that.
That's great. And I like the fact that you've provided some really good resources, and we'll put links to that in our show notes, just just for giving people that first steps if they want to, just learn a little bit about wargaming and play with some of those concepts. So thank you so much for that. And so if our audience would like to learn more about your work, what's the best way to contact you?
Write my name on X, formerly Twitter. Write my name on LinkedIn. I often just post there. Um, that's pretty much it at the moment, but I'm trying to communicate more and more on this social media. And I have a bunch of things on the pipeline that I will make public later on, but it's still not up there. So just follow me, and you'll see me discussing things. You'll see me just saying, "Oh, I did that," or sometimes complaining about wargaming related stuff. So just follow me on those two things, and yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Thomas. We're looking forward to your upcoming posts and your sharing content. I think that'd be great. I think it's important to connect with others who are doing work like the work you're doing and learning from each other. So again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Donna, for your time. Thank you very much for the audience also to listen to my podcast, to the podcast in its integrity. Very, very nice of you. Thank you.